Hello everyone. So, for the past couple of weeks, we have started to build our foundational understanding of the civil rights movement, beginning to collect information like historical vocabulary, or starting to piece together some context for why this movement started. But today is going to require something quite different. Because today, we are not just setting the scene. Today, we are starting to dig deep into our learning, thinking about the questions that we have, how this makes us feel, and how we can use this knowledge. This is going to require an investigation. Now, we're pretty caught up on our background knowledge. We have a pretty firm understanding of the types of treatment, the types of laws that led up to the civil rights movement. But what about the impact of those laws? What about the impact of this movement on the institutions that affected all Americans? How did these actions change the course of history forever? That is still a mystery. As we move into our reading today, we'll be detectives, piecing together the clues that the text gives us to figure out what the real impact of sit-ins were on the civil rights movement and the treatment of African Americans during the Jim Crow era. Today, we'll be back in our book, The Civil Rights Movement. Remember, if you don't have a physical copy of this book, there is also an online version that you can use to track along and find evidence for your writing and your questions embedded in this video. Today, we're going to start on page 20. So, we just finished reading about the impact of Rosa Parks and her civil disobedience and how that began to impact the services and skills and policies that affected the African American community. Today, we're actually moving into chapter 2, Students Taking Action. And here I see that they've included a picture of the Rex Theater for Colored People. Remember, when we hear the phrase colored people, that is a historical term. So we're no longer using those words to discuss people of color. Instead, we can use African American or Black to talk about this community in modern language. I'm picking up back on page 21. The concept of peaceful protest and civil disobedience. Reminder, civil disobedience was this idea that we could protest without being violent. We could break rules without harming other people. And civil disobedience caught on. People in other cities organized bus boycotts. Peaceful demonstrations took place across the South as both white and Black Americans rallied behind King. Segregation rules were lifted for more schools and bus systems. So, already, as I'm thinking about the impact of civil disobedience, I'm seeing that bus boycotts and movements like the Little Rock Nine meant more schools and bus systems were accessible or free for all people. Let's keep reading. Restaurants, movie theaters, and other public places, however, remained segregated. An African American could shop in a department store, but could not sit down to eat at the lunch counter there. In the 1960s, college students began to organize demonstrations to push for equality in such places. Page 22. So, at the very top, we're seeing this photograph where it looks like a bunch of young men sitting at a restaurant, and the caption says, "Protesters at sit-ins often had to endure abuse and insults from angry whites." So I'm assuming that because of this caption, these young men were not just eating lunch here, but rather they were protesters staging a sit-in. Let's keep reading. Segregated Lunches. In February 1960, 4 African-American college students entered Woolworth's department store in Greensboro, North Carolina. Ignoring the reserved for whites sign, they each took a seat at the lunch counter. Though asked to leave, the 4 stayed until the store closed. Word of this sit-in spread. Within days, sit-ins were taking place at other department stores and in other cities. So, based on this knowledge, I see that sit-in is also a bolded keyword. So, I'm going to want to pause and add that to my glossary now. Now that I've added that to my glossary, I'm going to pick back up at hundreds. Hundreds of people attended rallies and peaceful demonstrations in Greensboro. The African American population began a general boycott of segregated stores. The protesters were met with anger. Food and coffee were poured over their heads. They were yanked off their stools and beaten. They were arrested, several of them more than once. But the protesters remained calm. They entered a store neatly dressed and sat down quietly. They stared straight ahead, never at their attackers. They did not move from their positions, even if a person beside them was dragged from a stool. In Atlanta, Georgia, students Jillian Bond and Lonnie King called for that city to organize its own sit-ins. In Nashville, Tennessee, student leader James Lawson explained proper sit-in behavior. So I'm going to pause and look at this inset inside my book, entitled Yesterday's Headlines. So again, I'm seeing a picture of a sit-in inside a restaurant, but this time I'm seeing a gathering of kind of angry looking people behind the protesters. Let's read about what's going on. Many people felt that segregation was normal. The separation of white and black people had been a part of life for generations in the South. One white Southerner said, "Well, it's just not the things we're used to down here. We're not used to them, blacks, sitting down beside us because I wasn't raised with them. I never have lived with them, and I'm not going to start now." Some whites argued that restaurants were being denied their rights. They claimed that restaurants and lunch counters had the right to serve whomever they wished. We're going to keep this article and this idea, this question in mind as we continue our reading, because this is going to be the foundation for our own argumentative writing later this week. Now we're going to pick back up at this included at the bottom of page 23 and then flip right over to page 24. This included remaining quiet, asking for help, supporting a team leader, and remembering love and nonviolence. Giving in. As sit-ins spread, violence became worse. Protesters were arrested by the hundreds. Some were beaten or killed. In Atlanta, Georgia, someone threw acid in a protester's face. In Texas, a man was kidnapped, beaten, and left hanging upside down from a tree with KKK carved into his stomach. Policemen broke up rallies with the use of dogs, chains, and clubs. Yet, in the face of violence, the students bravely continued their protest. Within months, businesses were feeling the pressure. Now, before I continue on, I'm going to take a look at this text feature. So I see a group of people dressed all in white. I see that they're all white people. And the caption says, the KKK and other groups engaged in violence against the peaceful protesters. So from my background knowledge and my earlier experience in this book, I know that the KKK was a hate group that used violence to try and make sure that African Americans were not given equal rights. I'm picking up again on page 24 and immediately moving over to page 25. On July 25th, the downtown stores in Greensboro admitted defeat. Stores in Nashville and other cities followed. Even the mayor of Nashville came to agree with the protesters. Lunch counters became integrated, and African Americans and whites were soon sitting and eating together. In 1960, several students across the country organized the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. Anyone, white, African American, young, or old, could join. Thousands of people across the country did. So now it is our job as historic investigators to not just dive into some of those questions, but to reflect on our learning and use it to build something new, to use our own ideas in partnership with our text evidence to think about how this affects our own thinking and our own lives. Now, I think a lot of you already know this, but my mother actually works in a museum. She's a professional historic investigator, and there are a few parts of her job that are really important to what we're learning right now. One of the most important jobs of a professional historian is to keep track of your data or your learning as you go. These are called archives. So in our case, our archives are our ongoing records to keep track of our learning on the civil rights movement are going to include our glossary, our key events tracker, and our wow chart to include interesting facts that we learned. After you complete your reading for this Edpuzzle, make sure that right after you're going and recording some of the new words, events, or facts that you learned about this period of history so that you can build your expertise as a historian.